Somewhere in Norway, in the year 865 AD, a 17-year-old boy made a decision that would get him killed. Or make him rich. He didn't know which. That boy is you tonight. And before this journey is over, you are going to understand something about the Viking world that almost no one talks about. Not the raids, not the battles, not the mythology. Something quieter and stranger than any of that. Something quieter and stranger than any of that. You are going to understand why a perfectly comfortable life felt like a slow death to so many ordinary men. And why, for a generation of farmers and fishermen on the edge of a frozen sea, sailing toward violence was the most rational choice available. The horned helmet, by the way, invented in the 1800s. Not a single confirmed example has ever been found on an actual battlefield. Most Vikings never raided at all. And the man who did, the real man, not the legend, was tired, usually cold, frequently afraid, and driven by something far more relatable than bloodlust. Tonight we find out what that something was. Settle in, let the noise of the day begin to fade, and let us travel back to a narrow valley on the edge of the world, to the year when everything changed. But before we set sail, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It means more than you know, and it helps other people who love history find this channel. I'm also always curious, where in the world are you listening from tonight? And what time is it? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. And now, the valley is waiting. You are not a warrior yet. You are a young man, somewhere in your late teens, perhaps 17, perhaps 19. And your world, your entire world, is a narrow valley on the western coast of what will one day be called Norway. It is the year 865 AD. The valley is beautiful in a way that is almost cruel. To the west, dark cliffs drop straight into a slate-grey sea. To the east, mountains so steep and so close that in winter the sun barely clears their peaks, casting your home in shadow for weeks at a time. Between the cliffs and the mountains, there is a thin ribbon of farmable land, and this is where your family lives. Your home is a longhouse. It is a single long building, perhaps about 60 feet from one end to the other, built from thick timber posts and walls of wattle and daub, a lattice of sticks plastered with mud and straw. The roof is turf, living grass growing on a thick layer of earth, which keeps the interior surprisingly warm even in the worst winters, because the grass itself acts as insulation. You have slept in this building your entire life. You know every beam, every shadow, every smell. And the smell is something a visitor from your future world would never forget. The longhouse has no separate rooms, no chimney. There is a single long fire pit running down the center of the dirt floor, and the smoke from that fire has nowhere to go except slowly upward, drifting toward a small hole in the roof ridge. The walls and rafters are black with years of accumulated soot. The air inside is permanently hazy, smelling of wood smoke, animal dung, cooked meat, wet wool, and the particular earthy smell of human bodies living very close together for a very long time. The walls themselves are thick enough that you can feel the cold pressing against them from outside, a presence as real as any person in the room. In the deepest part of winter, the temperature inside is somewhere between uncomfortable and survivable, kept above freezing by the fire and by the bodies of the people and animals sharing the space. It is not warm, but it is alive. Because you do not live alone in this building. At one end of the longhouse, separated by a low wooden partition, are your animals. 3 cows, several sheep, a pair of goats. In the deepest winter months, they are brought inside entirely, not merely for their own warmth, but for yours. Here is something that surprises almost everyone who learns it. The animals weren't brought inside to be kept warm by the house. The house was kept warm by the animals. A single cow produces about as much heat continuously as a large space heater. In a Norwegian winter, 3 cows sleeping 30 feet from where you lay were the difference between a comfortable night and a dangerous one. You share the rest of the space with your parents, your 2 younger sisters, your father's elderly mother, and 2 thralls, the Norse word for slaves, who do the heaviest of the farm work. Stop and picture that for a moment. A Norse farm family in winter lived in roughly 40 square meters of shared space, alongside 3 cows, several sheep, 2 enslaved people, and an elderly grandmother. That is smaller than most modern studio apartments, and they lived that way for 6 months of the year. Your family is not rich, but you are not poor either. You are what we might call solidly middle. Your father is a bondi, a free farmer, a landholder, a man with rights in the local assembly. He is respected. He is known. He is not the lowest man in the valley, and he is not the highest. And for most of your life, this farm, this valley, this smoke-filled longhouse was the only life you expected. Your days begin before the sun. In summer, that means waking in a pale, almost blue half-light. The sky never quite dark in these northern latitudes. In winter, it means waking in total blackness, the fire banked down to embers overnight, the cold pressing in from every wall. Your first task, every morning without exception, is the fire. You learned as a young child to coax a flame from the banked coals using dried moss, birch bark and breath. Patient, careful breath, feeding air to the tiny orange glow until it blooms into something real. Fire is not a convenience in your world. It is the difference between life and death. A fire that goes out on a winter night is a serious problem. A fire that spreads beyond the pit is catastrophe. You have known both. Once the fire is alive, the morning work begins. The animals need tending, feeding, watering, mucking out their end of the longhouse. Your father does it. His mother did it before her hands got too stiff. You have done it since you were old enough to hold a pitchfork. It is unglamorous, relentless work, and it falls to everyone, regardless of age or status. The main meal of the day comes mid-morning, once the essential tasks are done. Your diet is simple, seasonal, and occasionally monotonous to a degree that would be difficult for a modern person to fully appreciate. The backbone of most meals is a thick porridge, barley most often, sometimes rye, sometimes oats, cooked with water or milk over the fire in a heavy iron pot. It is filling. It is warm. On cold mornings, it is genuinely delicious in the way that only truly hungry people can understand. On good days, there is dried or salted fish, cod or herring, preserved from the summer catch. On better days, there is smoked meat, the leg of a sheep, a piece of salted pork from the autumn slaughter. There is dairy, sour milk, butter, a soft, crumbly cheese. There are dried berries pounded into paste, dense flatbread baked on stones by the fire. And this is the detail that tends to disturb people the most: the weevils in the flour. Small black beetles that infested every barrel were not removed before cooking. There was no reliable way to remove them. By the end of winter, they had eaten enough of the flour that the porridge was more insect than grain. For a family in the lean months, the weevils were not a contamination. They were, horrifyingly, a source of protein. You eat what the farm produces and what the season allows. In the lean months of late winter, when the stores are running low and the first green shoots are still weeks away, hunger is not a metaphor. It sits with you, a dull ache in your stomach that you have learned to simply accept as part of the season, the way you accept cold and darkness. This is the life you were born into, stable, rooted, connected to the land and to your people. Your father's farm will one day be your farm. The valley will hold you, as it held him, as it held his father before him. Or it would, if everything had stayed the same. But it didn't. The change begins with a ship. You are 17 the first time you see a real longship up close. It belongs to a jarl, a Norse chieftain named Sigurd, and he has beached it in the small harbour at the mouth of your valley to spend the winter making repairs. You are sent with your father to help, to trade labour for a small share of silver. You spend 3 weeks working alongside the shipwright, caulking seams with wool soaked in pine tar, replacing a cracked strake along the hull, helping to re-step the single mast. And during those 3 weeks, you cannot stop looking at this ship. It is called Odin's Eye, and it is, without question, the most beautiful and terrifying object you have ever seen. 18 meters long, barely 2.5 meters wide, extraordinarily narrow, built for speed rather than cargo. The hull is clinker-built, overlapping planks of oak, each one slightly wider than the last as they rise from the keel, riveted together with iron nails and sealed with tarred wool. The whole structure is flexible in a way that seems impossible. In heavy seas, the hull can twist and give slightly, bending with the water rather than fighting it, which is why these ships can survive conditions that would smash a more rigid vessel to pieces. At either end, stem posts rise in elegant curves, the prow carved into a serpent's head, the stern into a curling tail. These are not purely decorative. They are statements. This ship is alive, and it is dangerous. When all 30 oars are manned, and the great square sail is raised on its mast, a sail of coarse woolen cloth, dyed in red and ochre stripes. This ship can move across the water at speeds that seem, to a man who has only ever known farm carts and fishing boats, supernatural. Here is what I need you to ask yourself, right now, in the quiet of wherever you are tonight. If you had grown up in that valley, if everything you could see from the highest point of your farm was the same land your grandfather had worked. And then you saw this ship, and you knew that men who sailed it had been somewhere, had seen something, had become something different. Would you have stayed? Be honest with yourself, because the answer matters. It is the answer that launched the Viking Age. You sit on the gunwale one evening as the light fails, and you run your hand along the smooth oak of the top strake, worn silky by years of rope and weather and sea spray. You can feel the faint grain of the wood under your palm. You can smell the pine tar and the salt. And something shifts in you. Not loudly, more like ice beginning to crack. A slow, deep sound felt more than heard. By the time spring comes, you have spoken to your father, and your father has spoken to Sigurd, and you have been offered a place at an oar. Your first voyage is about to begin. Before you can take that place at the oar, something happens that explains everything about the world you are about to enter. 3 days before departure, a man named Hrolf, a farmer from the next valley, bigger than you and 10 years older, walks into the harbour where you are loading supplies and says, loudly and in front of witnesses, that your father cheated him in a cattle trade 2 winters ago. He doesn't say it quietly. He says it so that people can hear. Your father is not there. You are. And every man within earshot goes very still. You understand in your stomach before you understand in your mind that this is not merely an argument about cattle. It is something else, something that requires a response. Not because you are angry, though you are, but because the alternative is worse than fighting. The alternative is doing nothing. And in your world, a man who accepts a public insult without response is not simply disrespected. He loses something with a weight to it. He loses the thing that makes him a full member of the world he lives in. Your honor is your social currency. It is, in many ways, more important than your life. You have no police to call. There is no institution that will handle this for you. There is only you and your arm, and what you do in the next 30 seconds. Here is a law from the actual Norse legal codes that will tell you everything about this world. It was legally permissible, expected even, to kill a man on the spot if he called you nithingud, meaning coward, or if he called you ardgud, a word implying unmanliness. Not just grounds for a lawsuit, grounds for immediate execution, with no legal consequence to you. The word alone was violence enough to justify lethal response. Language and blood were that tightly coupled. You step forward, and you tell Hrolf, in front of the same witnesses, that his accusation is a lie, and that your father will meet him at the Thing, the Norse Regional Assembly, to answer the charge properly, with men who know the truth on both sides. Hrolf looks at you for a long moment. Then he spits on the ground and walks away. You have done it correctly, not with your fists. That would have been the wrong response here. Messy, ungoverned, beneath you. You have invoked the legal process. You have demonstrated that your family will answer, formally and in public, before the community. Later, one of Sigurd's older men finds you by the water and tells you, without ceremony, that you handled that well. It is the first time a grown man who is not your father has said something like that to you. You will think about it for years. This, you are beginning to understand, is the architecture of your world. A world built on what men do in front of witnesses. Honor is not an internal quality, not something you feel about yourself in private. It is entirely external. It is what others can say about you in public. It lives in reputation, in the collective memory of your community, in the stories people tell about you at the thing, at the feast, at the graveside. There is also the thing itself, the regional assembly where free men gather periodically to settle disputes, pass laws, and judge cases. You have attended the local thing with your father since you were a boy. You have watched men argue cases, heard the chieftains give judgments, seen fines levied, and occasionally more severe punishments handed down. It is the closest thing your world has to a legal system, and it has real authority. But it depends entirely on the willingness of free men to enforce its decisions. Your weapons are acquired before you leave. Your father gives you the axe that belonged to his own father. A simple, bearded axe, the lower part of the blade swept down in a long curve that makes it useful both as a tool and a weapon. The handle is ashwood, smooth and dark with age and handling. The blade has been sharpened so many times that it is thinner than it was originally, but it is still solid, still balanced, still capable of splitting kindling or splitting a skull with equal efficiency. You also carry a sex, pronounced seax, a single-edged knife at your hip. Not merely a weapon, but your multi-tool and constant companion. You use it to eat, to whittle, to cut rope, to skin an animal, to defend yourself if it comes to that. It lives in a leather sheath, and you have worn it so constantly that you no longer feel its weight. What you do not have, at least not yet, is a sword. A good Viking sword cost the equivalent of 16 cows. To put that in perspective, your father's entire herd is 3. A sword was not a purchase. It was a generational inheritance. When a Norse saga describes a man giving his son a named sword, it is not a detail. It is the equivalent of signing over a house. The blades are given names. They are passed down through generations. A man's sword outlives him by centuries. You will not have a sword on this voyage. But you watch the men who do, and you study the way they carry themselves. That particular looseness in the shoulder, the absence of self-consciousness about the weight at their hip. And you think, someday. The morning you leave is grey and wet, a late spring rain that turns the path down to the harbour into black mud. Your mother stands in the doorway of the longhouse and watches you go. She does not weep. This is not a world where mothers weep in doorways. She is the daughter of a farmer and the wife of a farmer, and she understands the calculus. The farm will not get larger by staying on it. The silver that pays a jarl's warriors, that buys land for a younger son, that silver comes from out there, beyond the horizon. She watches you, and you do not look back. The longship is already in the water. You count 29 other men around you, some from the valley, others strangers who carry their weapons with an ease that makes your own self-consciousness obvious to everyone, including yourself. Sigurd stands at the stern, wide through the chest and shoulders, face weathered to a permanent dark bronze, beard braided into 2 points, each tied with a small silver ring. He looks at the crew assembling around him. He looks at you. He says nothing, but there is something in his expression, not unkindness, not contempt, more like assessment. Like a farmer looking at a young horse, wondering what it will become. He gives the order to launch. The oars go into the water. You take your place on the rowing bench, and the world you have known your entire life begins to slide away behind you. The first thing you learn about life on a longship is that it is extraordinarily uncomfortable. There is no shelter, no roof, no cabin, no sleeping quarters of any kind. The ship is open to the sky from one end to the other, a shell of wood and wool and iron, without walls, without protection from rain, wind, spray, or sun. Your sleeping arrangement, when the crew camps on a beach, is a leather sleeping sack, waterproofed with fat, which you lay on the ground and climb inside. On nights when the ship must remain at sea, you sleep on your rowing bench, wedged between the hull and the rib of the boat, wrapped in your cloak with your shield propped to windward to break the spray. Sleep comes in fragments, 2 hours here, 3 hours there, always interrupted by the watch, the weather, the movement of the ship. You are cold, almost constantly, in a way that becomes its own kind of background noise, a permanent condition you stop consciously noticing after the first few days. The food on board is what you brought with you: hard bread in sealed barrels, dried fish, salted meat, dried peas. There is a small iron cauldron on board for heating water, but open fires on a wooden ship are obviously impossible at sea, so most of your food is eaten cold. Occasionally, when the crew beaches for the night, a fire is built on shore and the cauldron comes into its own. Hot porridge, warm salted beef, the particular luxury of a mug of heated ale. But most of the time, it is cold food eaten with hands that smell of rope and sea salt. Picture 30 men sleeping on open wooden benches with no roof above them, rain coming sideways off the North Sea. Every man hungry, cold, and not entirely sure where he is. And ask yourself, what is the one thing that keeps a group of people like that from falling apart? The answer in the Viking world is not discipline. It is not fear of punishment. It is something far older. It is the fact that every man on that bench knows that every other man on that bench will be watching what he does when things get difficult. And they will remember. And they will tell the story. Reputation again. It reaches everywhere. In calm water, rowing is almost meditative. The long, smooth pull of the oar, the slip of the blade through dark water, the rhythmic creak of the rowlock, the soft breathing of the man beside you. There is a pace to it, a shared heartbeat of motion that is oddly peaceful. In heavy seas, it is something else entirely. The longship does not fight the waves, It rides them. It climbs the face of a swell, pauses for a terrifying moment at the crest. You can see the entire grey, heaving world from up there, and then plunges down the far side, the bow burying in white water before rising again. Water comes over the sides. Buckets pass up and down the line of men. Bail, pass, bail, pass. An endless rhythm that becomes as automatic as breathing. Navigation on these open sea passages works in ways that would astonish a modern observer. There is no compass. There is no chart in any useful sense. Navigation is memory, observation, and a sixth sense that experienced mariners develop over years. You navigate by the stars, the pole star above all, by the sun's arc, which tells you your latitude, by birds. The presence of certain seabirds tells you that land is within roughly 50 miles, even when you cannot see it. And here is the one that sounds like mythology, but is historical fact. Ravens were carried in cages on Viking ships, specifically for navigation. When the crew was uncertain of their position in overcast weather, a raven would be released. A raven, unlike a seabird, instinctively flies toward land. Watch which direction it goes, and you have your heading. This is why Odin, the god of the wanderers and the lost, keeps 2 ravens as his companions. They are not a symbol. They are a survival tool, elevated to mythology. By the second week, you can tell, from the colour of the water and the shape of the swells, whether you are over deep ocean or approaching a shelf. You can read the wind from the behaviour of the sail without being told. You can look at a cloud formation on the horizon and feel, in some wordless way you could not explain, that the weather is changing. You are becoming a sailor. 3 weeks after leaving Norway, you see land. The coast of what will one day be called England rises out of a morning mist. Low cliffs above a grey-green sea, dark with heather. There is a smell to it, even from this distance, a smell of earth and vegetation that is startlingly different from the salt, clean air you have breathed for weeks. The men around you straighten on their benches. The mood of the ship changes. You are here to trade. Sigurd has brought amber and furs and soapstone vessels from Norway and intends to return with silver, cloth and iron. This is commerce, not war. The trading is conducted on the beach through intermediaries, a man who speaks enough Norse to manage basic transactions. Sigurd examines the English silver offered in payment with the same critical attention he gives to the hull of his ship, testing coins with a knife tip, weighing them in a small balance scale he carries in a pouch at his belt. Not all Viking voyages were raids. The same men who traded peacefully at a Frankish market in June might raid an undefended monastery in September, depending entirely on circumstances and opportunity. Violence was a tool, not a vocation. The trading takes 2 days. At the end of it, the hold contains considerably more silver than it left Norway with. But on the 3rd night, everything changes. One of Sigurd's men returns from scouting up the coast with information. A small religious community, stone building, handful of inhabitants, a monastery. Sigurd says nothing when he hears this. He simply nods slowly and goes to stand at the edge of the firelight, looking out at the dark water. You watch what happens next very carefully, because it is not what you expected. There is no announcement, no formal decision, no captain standing up and declaring a change of plan.
What there is, instead, is a conversation that spreads through the camp like smoke, in ones and twos, in the glances exchanged over the fire, in the way men clean weapons they had already cleaned that afternoon. And then Sigurd comes to you. Not to the group, to you specifically. He sits down beside you and is quiet for a moment. Then he says that tomorrow morning the ship will go north along the coast, and that anyone who wishes to stay with the trading goods and wait is welcome to do so. No dishonour in it. He is giving you a choice. The average Viking raid on a monastery lasted less than 20 minutes. The communities were typically small, unguarded, and far from any military response. This was not a pitched battle. It was a smash-and-grab operation that the Vikings had, by this point, refined into something almost mechanical. In and out before the nearest armed men could be mobilized. 20 minutes. That is the length of a single television episode. Long enough to change the rest of your life. You sit with his words for a long time after he walks away. And here is a question that has no comfortable answer, and I want you to sit with it tonight rather than answer it quickly. At what point does survival stop being an excuse? You grew up poor, not starving, but genuinely constrained. The silver from this monastery would buy land, real land, the kind of land that changes what your children inherit. The men inside that stone building have more wealth in their candlesticks than your father will see in his lifetime. They did not earn it in any way you recognize. They received it as gifts from the wealthy. None of that makes what is about to happen right. But it does make it comprehensible. And comprehension is not the same as forgiveness. It is simply the beginning of honesty. You lie down in your sleeping sack, and you do not sleep. When the sky begins to pale, you get up. You pick up your axe. You walk to the boat. You have made your choice. The raid begins at dawn. Not because dawn is dramatic, because dawn is practical. The light is just enough to navigate by, the monastery's inhabitants still in their first sleep. You are in the first group ashore. The boats are dragged up the rocky beach as quietly as 30 men can manage. The sound of the sea covers what the oarlocks do not. Your axe is in your hand. Your shield is on your arm. Your mouth is dry. You run. Not bellowing, not roaring, just running. A fast, silent approach across wet grass, the dark shape of the stone building growing larger with every stride. The door of the monastery is wood. It is not built to resist this. What follows is chaos, and then, very quickly, quiet. The monks are not soldiers. They cannot fight. Some run. Some stand still, clutching their vestments, their faces white with a particular expression you will see in your memory for the rest of your life. Not quite fear, not quite incomprehension, something between the two. Sigurd's men move with the practiced efficiency of people who have done this before. Not cruelty for its own sake, but purpose.
The valuables are stripped from the chapel with methodical speed. A man with a sack moves along the altar. Another is in the small treasury. Another is at the door, watching the approach from the settlement nearby. It is over in less than a quarter hour. The hall, chalices of silver and gilded copper, several book covers stripped of their precious metal fittings, a small wooden chest containing coins, a set of bronze candlesticks. 3 monks are taken as well, to be sold at a coastal market on the way home, or kept in the Jarl's household. You carry a sack of loot back to the ship. Your hands do not shake. You are not certain what this means about you. The return voyage is faster than the outward one, driven by a following wind. The ship runs before it with a kind of exhilaration, the hull lifting slightly at speed, the sound of water along the strakes, a rising hiss. The men talk more on the return. Stories are told and retold, the events growing larger and more dramatic with each telling. This is not mere boasting. This is the beginning of the oral record, the accumulation of the stories that will become, eventually, the sagas. What Sigurd's men did on that coast will be told around fires for years. The telling is part of the point. The reputation built from the telling is part of the reward. You sit on your bench at night and listen to the stars. You hold the 2 truths side by side, the expression on the monk's face and the weight of silver at the bottom of the sack. And you do not resolve them, because there is no resolution. You simply carry both. The Norseman's religious world is never far from his mind on these voyages. Your gods are not distant figures, passive observers from a remote heaven. They are present, active, deeply involved in the world of men. Odin, the All-Father, not a god of peace, not a god of simple wisdom, but a god of war, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. He gave one of his eyes to drink from the well of wisdom. He hanged himself from Yggdrasil, the world tree, for 9 days and 9 nights to learn the secret of the runes. He sends his Valkyries, his choosers of the slain, to ride over the field of every battle, selecting which warriors will fall. The warriors chosen by the Valkyries are carried to Valhalla, Odin's hall, a vast mead hall where the chosen dead spend their afterlife, feasting, fighting, and waiting for Ragnarok, the final battle that will end the world. To die in battle, chosen by Odin, is not a tragedy. It is an achievement. It is the best death available. This is not mere mythology. It is the active framework through which you understand your life and your possible deaths. When Sigurd pours a small libation of ale over the side of the ship before a crossing, he is not performing a quaint tradition. He is communicating with real powers that he believes can actually affect the outcome of the voyage. When a man is given a good sword and it is dedicated to Tyr, the one-handed god of single combat and justice, that dedication is meant to be operative, to invoke a real protective and martial power. When you see a small carved pendant of Thor's hammer around a crewmate's neck, you understand that it is there because thunder is real, and Thor's protection is real, and the sea is a place where a man needs all the protection he can get. And what of the fear of death? It is present always. but managed, held in a particular shape by the framework of your beliefs. Cowardice is the real death. Not the death of the body, but the death that comes from failing your brothers, from running when you should have held, from living on when your honor demanded that you fall. A man who dies bravely is remembered. His name outlives him. His deeds are told in the firelit halls. This is, in the absence of any other form of immortality, your culture can reliably promise what you have: the immortality of reputation. Cattle die, and kinsmen die, and so one dies oneself. But there is one thing I know will never die: the reputation of each dead man. The Havamal, the words of the High One. This is the bedrock of your world. You return to Norway in late summer, the longship heavy with silver, and the particular exhausted satisfaction of men who have been a long way from home and are now coming back. The valley looks smaller than you left it, or perhaps you are larger. It is hard to say. The silver is divided according to the agreed shares. Your portion is enough to make your father straighten slightly when you set it on the table. Not a fortune, not wealth, but real, solid purchasing power in a world where silver is the measure of almost everything. Your mother says nothing about where it came from. That winter, when the thing is held and the local farmers gather to settle the season's business, you sit among the men, not the boys, the men, and no one questions your right to be there. You have a sword now, purchased at a coastal market on the voyage home. It is not the finest sword in the valley, but it is a sword. And something in the way the older men look at you has changed. But it is a sword. You will go again. Not every year, but 5 more times over the next decade. To the coast of the Frankish coast, up the great rivers of the east, where Norse traders who have established themselves along routes through what will become Russia carry furs and amber to the markets of Constantinople and Baghdad. You will see the golden domes of Byzantium from the deck of a riverboat. You will trade with men whose language you cannot speak across a table covered in silver. You will see things you cannot explain. You will do things you are not entirely proud of. You will lose men you cared about. You will carry it all in the way all men of your time carry it. Without resolution, without apology, simply as the texture of a life lived honestly in the world as it actually is. The Vikings lasted roughly from the late 8th century to the mid-11th. 250 years of that particular combination of seafaring, trading, raiding, exploration, and settlement. In that time, they reached more of the world than any other European culture. They settled Iceland, and from Iceland sailed to Greenland, and from Greenland, Leif Erikson crossed the North Atlantic to the coast of North America, 500 years before Columbus. They founded Kiev, the city that would become the heart of Russian civilization. Their warriors, the Varangian Guard, served as the personal bodyguard of the Byzantine emperors in Constantinople. They settled Normandy, and 2 centuries later, their descendants invaded England in 1066 and permanently changed the English language. They produced a body of literature, the sagas, the Eddas, the poetry, that remains among the most psychologically sophisticated writing of the medieval world. And then, gradually, they became absorbed. The settlements colonized, the trade routes normalized, the religion converted. The sharp edge softened. But they left their marks everywhere. The days of the week in English still bear their names. Tuesday is Tyr's Day. Wednesday is Odin's Day. Thursday is Thor's Day. Friday is Frigg's, or perhaps Freya's. 4 days out of 7, when you name the day, you are speaking a fragment of the Norse world back into existence. And the myths? The horned helmets, a 19th century artistic invention borrowed from Bronze Age ceremonial headgear and cemented in popular consciousness by Wagner's operatic costumes. The constant ferocity, a partial truth made whole by those who experienced Norse raids and did not write about them charitably. The monastic chroniclers who kept the records of early medieval Europe were not disposed to nuance when describing the men who had burned their libraries. But the men themselves, the bondi, the oarsman, the trader, the navigator, the boy who ran his hand along the oak strake of a longship by lamplight and felt something shift inside him, were more complicated than their legends. They were men who built the most technically sophisticated ships the world had seen, who navigated open ocean without instruments by reading the sky, the sea, and the birds, who governed themselves through assemblies with a passion for due process that any modern lawyer would recognize, who composed poetry of extraordinary subtlety about grief, honor, desire, and the strangeness of being alive, who felt the cold and the boredom and the fear, and went anyway. Thank you for joining me tonight on this long voyage. From the smoke-filled longhouse in a Norwegian valley, to the creak of oars on the open sea, to the grey coast of a foreign land rising out of the morning mist, we have walked, however briefly, in the boots of a man from a world so different from ours, and yet, in so many ways, not so different at all. The longship is gone now. The valley is quiet. The fire in the longhouse has burned down to embers. I hope wherever you are in the world tonight, whatever the hour, whatever the weather outside your window, this has been good company for the quiet hours. If you enjoyed this journey, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment. I read every one, and they make these long voyages worthwhile. Sleep well. We will sail again soon.